We are very happy that we can host this webinar together. So, Mrs. Bentele, the floor is yours for the welcome words.
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much for the organization and the initiative to speak about the summit and the lessons learned from the summit and the way forward. I think this is very, very crucial, because summits are nice, and it's of course nice to have a summit after 5 years, but a summit is also a lot of rhetoric, and it's a lot of declaration, it's a lot of paperwork. But what I think what is crucial is that we get to work, and for this we need cooperation, we need coordination, and we need working structures. This is our credo in EPP. We even have underlined it by our request during the election campaign. We were even requesting a commissioner on Africa. This idea, unfortunately, was never taken up. It was presented to Ursula von der Leyen, but it was not taken up. But this shows that we wish for a permanent work on Africa and our neighboring continent. We are very much convinced that it is very, very necessary to have a different partnership. And it is being talked about a partnership on equal footing in many documents, also in the strategy of the European Parliament, and also in many documents of the European Commission. But I think we should talk about interests, because Europe has interests, Africa has interests, and we should meet where our interests meet. So I think this is the idea of a real and honest partnership. And we should get to work. And I think the measure, if we are successful, is how many investments are being made. And it's not mainly development aid or international cooperation, as we are saying now. It's not about 150 billion more or less. I think it's really about how business works together, how the economies prosper in both continents, and how we can trade, and also the internal market in Africa make work. I think these are the most important features for our cooperation. This is where we should cooperate, and this is, from my point of view and of the point of view of my group, this is the way forward. Of course, we have questions on the table which are independent from these issues. We talk about, I would mention health, and I would also mention food. Because in this regard, we see that a purely economic partnership is not going to work, because the differences are too high, and the technological levels, I think, are too different. So this will continue to be a work for the traditional international partnership work as we have done. And unfortunately, what we see now with the war in Ukraine and the potential loss of harvests with regard to wheat, which are very important for the African continent, as we found out, we will maybe run into a new food crisis. So again, we will have to tackle the issue of hunger, which also came up during the pandemic again. So this is something, unfortunately, we are still there to discuss about these issues. But I think in general, what we aim at is this partnership, which this economic development, which comes from inside of the African Union, and also the dependence of Europe towards Africa. Because if we now talk about cutting down imports from Russia regarding gas and oil, we have to look for replacement of these imports. And it's very clear that the African continent is a potential partner with regard to energy partnerships, resource partnerships, and so on. So I would talk about a dependency, reciprocity of dependency, and we should be aware of this. And I think if we are honest in this regard, this might be also a new foundation for our partnership. So this maybe as a first take with regards to the future. I would say that the Commission plays a very crucial role in this, because if I look to the member states which have not yet agreed on the post-Cotonou agreement, not yet, even if it was about to expire at the end of in 2020, it was prolonged until 21. It's not yet signed. So I think the member states are not up to the task. It's really very much a lot of responsibility lies on the Commission, I think, to bring this partnership forward. and to do it in a really coordinated manner. I was a bit surprised to hear from Commissioner Urpilainen that there is no idea yet how to monitor the outcome of the summit, what kind of monitoring mechanism will be installed. I hope this will happen soon, because we need working structures, because there are a lot of projects, a lot of ideas in the declaration of the summit and in the EU African strategy. So we really need working structures. This is this is an idea that I'm promoting. We do not need so many summits. We need working structures where a coordination on a daily or on a monthly basis, at least, is being done between the European Union and the African Union, because there are also new developments. If we look into the Green Deal, which is being implemented currently at the European level, we need to take into consideration that we do not install technical burdens to products which are being manufactured in the African continent. So we need a lot of political dialogue. We need a much closer political dialogue to really bring this partnership to work and to have a framework for business to do business.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bentele, for this introduction. You have already mentioned a lot of topics that we are also going to tackle, considering, of course, how many topics there are also for such a huge summit as the AU-EU summit. I hope that we can tackle most of them. I'm not sure if we can tackle all of them, but there's also, we do have a moderated discussion now, and then there's the chance also for the audience to ask some further questions in case there's something we did not tackle that you wanted us to talk about. So you will have the opportunity to ask questions via the Q&A function. The chat is also in use, but you can use the chat also to discuss amongst yourselves as the participants. Before we continue now with the discussion, where also Mrs. Bentele is going to join, I would like to introduce our further panelists. We are very happy and honored to have His Excellency Ambassador Awad Sakine Ahmad today with us. He is the permanent representative of the African Union to the European Union. He was also in his previous career ambassador for Chad in Brussels and in South Africa. Moreover, he was the Minister of Economy and Finance in Chad and also a member of the Supreme Court in N'Djamena from 2006 to 2010. So, Mr. Ambassador, we are very happy to have you here. From the European Commission, I would like to welcome Ms. Paul Renier. He is the Deputy Head of the Strategic Partnerships with Africa and the ACP unit in the European Commission's Directorate General for International Partnerships. As an agricultural scientist with a postgraduate degree in irrigation engineering, he is an expert in development policy and cooperation with more than 30 years of experience in this sector. He also spent over 17 years in various countries, among them from the African continent, for example, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, and Tunisia. Also to you, Mr. Renier, welcome to this discussion. We have Cynthia Chigwenya. She is the African Youth Ambassador for Peace and coordinator for the Sub-Saharan Africa Political Dialogue Program of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in South Africa. Also a warm welcome to you. Ms. Chigwenya holds 2 master's degrees in development studies and social policy and development, and has already conducted a number of extensive studies on post-conflict peace building on the African continent, including conflict mediation in South Sudan and comparative analysis on Zimbabwe's legal framework for reconciliation. And last but not least, we have Dr. Benedikt Erfurt, who is senior researcher at the German Development Institute, DIE. He has been working in this position since April 2019, and he focuses on EU development policy, development finance, and also EU security policy and AU-EU relations. Before joining the DIE, he was a university lecturer in international relations and European policy in Paris. He has also already published several papers including on African-European relations. So also to you, Dr. Erfurt, welcome to this discussion. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, I would like to start with you and talk about that the AU-EU summit was supposed to set the framework and also priorities for African-European relations in the coming years. Seeing that these relations were rather strained recently, certainly aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, public reactions were not very enthusiastic about the outcome of the summit. What are your reactions? As to what extent was the summit successful in forging a new strategic partnership between the two continents?
Merci, merci madame, merci à vous tous. Je suis très content et très honoré de vous trouver ici ensemble pour que nous puissions échanger, comme l'a dit madame Helge Degar. Donc nous devrons réfléchir sur vraiment l'avenir. Je pense que moi je me dis les relations entre l'Union africaine et l'Union européenne, entre nos deux unions, ont été quand même des relations très excellentes. Elles n'ont pas été tendues, ça il faudrait que je le dise. C'est vrai, nous partageons des paradigmes ensemble pour changer un peu des méthodes d'approche, peut-être comme l'a dit Madame Bentele. Je pense que c'est très important. C'est-à-dire, entre partenaires, il faut être franc. C'est plus important. Et donc, je pense tout au long de ces sommets, mais également aussi lors des préparatifs de ces rencontres, nous avions également parlé en franchise. Parler en franchise pour dire que voilà, qu'est-ce que nous voulons par rapport à cette nouvelle coopération entre l'Union africaine et l'Union européenne. Donc, la base de cette coopération, il faudrait que nos deux populations communes, européennes et africaines, puissent bénéficier de quelque chose de concret. Qu'a-t-on fait depuis assez longtemps? Donc, depuis les Caire, on est arrivé par Lisbonne, après on est passé par Abidjan. Tout ceci est très important. Je pense que c'est indispensable de s'arrêter et faire un élan. Je pense pour le moment, nous avons eu la conviction ensemble de travailler avec nos amis européens, le président Charles Michel, Mme Ursula von der Leyen, mais également aussi tous les acteurs politiques, c'est-à-dire les parlementaires. Nous avons dit qu'il faudrait changer. Donc, comme vous savez, il faudrait qu'on voit des choses visibles. Vous prenez aujourd'hui, l'Afrique a besoin de quoi? D'un partenariat relatif à sa connectivité, les énergies qui manquent en Afrique. Nous avons les infrastructures. L'Afrique n'est pas reliée par des autoroutes qui peuvent communiquer, qui permettent, par exemple, à l'homme réel, à la femme réelle qui est quelque part au village, de travailler et d'avoir accès, par exemple, pour commercer à ces produits, que ce soit produits agricoles ou autres. Nous avons la jeunesse. On parle toujours de la jeunesse, mais il faudrait que cette jeunesse-là ait de l'emploi. Rien ne sert de former une jeunesse et d'avoir une jeunesse qui va aller directement au chômage et après, elle sera sujette à beaucoup de tentatives comme les terrorismes également, mais d'autres tentations comme la migration. Je voudrais également aussi parler de cette pandémie qui nous a tous montré ensemble que le monde est fragile et qui a montré par la suite, il faudrait que nécessairement ensemble que nous puissions travailler pour produire, par exemple, des outils et des matériels de vaccination qui peuvent être mis à l'encontre. Je pense que les économies africaines ont besoin de l'argent. Ils ont besoin de financement. Ils ont besoin du concret. C'est-à-dire qu'il faudrait s'en passer de toutes ces procédures qui sont très lourdes, qui ne permettent pas de mobiliser, par exemple, et pour transformer l'Afrique. Transformer l'Afrique dit quoi? Est-ce qu'on a besoin aujourd'hui de tout importer de l'extérieur en produits finis? Je ne pense pas. Nous avons les matières premières. L'Europe a cette possibilité d'avoir la technologie nécessaire pour faire installer des industries, par exemple, de transformation en Afrique, ce qui permettra d'absorber également les chômages, mais ce qui permettra également aussi aux Européens, par exemple, par rapport à leurs compétences, aussi de venir travailler chez nous. La porte n'est pas fermée de l'Afrique. Donc, c'est en cela que je pense qu'à l'époque, on parlait de la coopération très vieille. Vous avez tous suivi les ACP et l'Union européenne qui était une vieille coopération, mais je pense qu'il faut changer des choses. Il faut changer. On ne peut pas renouveler encore 40 ans une coopération qui n'a rien donné. Est-ce qu'on a vu quelque part un projet financé d'intégration, par exemple, qui relie toutes les capitales, qui a été financée, par exemple, par nous-mêmes, nous en tant qu'Union africaine et l'Union européenne. Je pense que c'est important. Est-ce que nous avons vu à travers les programmes Erasmus, que je soutiens très bien, est-ce que nous avons formé des jeunes qui sont directement employés par rapport au secteur privé, par rapport aussi à des formations, des petits métiers qui peuvent, par exemple, nourrir leur famille et subvenir à leurs besoins. Donc, tout cela, et au-delà de tout ce que vous voyez, nous avons aussi la coopération en matière de paix et sécurité qui est aussi fragile, la lutte contre le terrorisme. Ce qui touche à l'Afrique touche à l'Europe. Donc, comment nous allons nous mettre ensemble pour qu'on puisse trouver des maintiens de la paix qui va être, et d'imposition de la paix, qui va être fait, financé par nos partenaires nous-mêmes et répondre à nos aspirations pour que ce terrorisme-là puisse s'arrêter. Je pense que c'est des choses qui sont très importantes. Donc, il faudrait trouver, comme je l'ai dit, des moyens nécessaires et pour permettre vraiment que cette coopération puisse être fluide et perspicace. L'autre aspect que Madame avait évoqué, je pense qu'il faut créer des organes de coordination et de suivi. À l'époque, on fait des rencontres, c'est vrai, après on ne se retrouve pas, c'est des réunions peut-être ministérielles, des réunions de senior officers, on parle politique et après la mise en œuvre pose problème. Donc nous allons ensemble, je pense, avoir un dialogue politique entre commission et commission au mois de mai, certainement, les dates vont être arrêtées, et que nous allons tous ensemble nous retrouver pour redéfinir les projets que l'Afrique veut. Qu'est-ce que l'Afrique veut? Qu'est-ce que l'Europe pourrait faire en termes de l'autre? Comment nous allons profiter de la création de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, qui est un marché de 1,2 milliard d'habitants, en renforçant les tissus industriels de l'Afrique, et ça va permettre à l'Europe, le moment venu, d'être un grand partenaire avec un accord de libre-échange, et la mobilité entre les Africains, les 55 pays, va être aussi quelque chose d'assez important. Je pense qu'on ne peut pas vraiment à cette tribune tout dire, et je pense que les priorités ont été définies et il faudrait vraiment se mettre ensemble pour qu'au moins la mise en œuvre puisse être faite. Je voulais évoquer quelque chose. C'est-à-dire, avec l'Europe, nous parlons par exemple des énergies par exemple, renouvelables. Nous sommes engagés dans le cadre du climat avec l'Europe. Mais il faudrait comprendre aussi que l'Afrique a besoin aussi d'exploiter ces énergies fossiles parce que l'Afrique n'a pas de ressources pour financer son développement. Donc, travaillons à la longue pour un désengagement, mais cherchons à utiliser nos énergies fossiles pour qu'au moins nous puissions aussi donner un appui considérable aux infrastructures, par exemple, de nos pays. Je pense que nous allons travailler ensemble, nous sommes engagés, comme on l'a dit, comme vous avez tous suivi des partenariats d'égal à égal, avec une vision commune, mais également aussi avec vraiment également des hommes et des femmes engagés pour qu'au moins nos deux continents puissent avoir de la réalité et que nos populations puissent vraiment sentir que notre existence a permis de changer leur avenir et leur présent. Merci.
Merci beaucoup à vous. Thank you very much. Before we continue, I would like to also make you aware that we have a short poll that all the participants, all guests can participate in about the impressions of the AU-EU summit. And we have the questions, if you are satisfied with the results of the AU-EU summit, we would really like to know what our audience actually thinks about that. We would also like to know if you think that the summit fulfilled the expectations. And we would like you to tell us, where do you see the key challenges for EU-Africa relations? And there you have a choice of different topics. So while you are voting, I am going to continue with Ms. Chiguenya. And afterwards, we are going to see what our audience thinks about the summit and the challenges of European-African relations. But first of all, Ms. Chiguenya, also the ambassador spoke about the youth, and you are the AU youth ambassador. So you do not only represent Africa's youth, but also a significant part of society, since about 70% are under the age of 30. May I ask you what this young generation of Africans is essentially expecting from Europe and the African-European relationship, but also the AU's approach towards Europe? And what are critical issues that need to be tackled in your opinion? And did the summit live up to the expectations of young Africans?
Thank you very much, Lynn, for that introduction. Maybe it's important to first of all highlight that I don't only wear the African Union hat, but I also work for the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in South Africa. So I'm privileged enough to have foresight from both sides of this conversation. The first part of the question touched on a really significant topic, which is that young people make up a very big part of the African population, in some cases even up to 60% of the population. But what the narrative also does is that it discounts the role that young people could play in terms of their participation in political processes, as well as their participation in peace building itself. Because the narrative is that because we are many, we are over 60%, we're over 40%, then we must be included. But the narrative should actually be that regardless of how much of the population we constitute, it is really that conflict affects us as young people the most. We have young people that are child soldiers, and they've never really seen the light of a different future for them through which they can realize their goals. So apart from constituting a bigger part of our population, young people are affected by conflict. In the Southern African case, for example, in Cabo Delgado and Mozambique, we see this conflict affecting lives and livelihoods. That means it impacts on education, it impacts on them being able to fulfill their dreams. And in addition to that, we've also increasingly seen a number of young people engaging in peace building processes, starting organizations, and really engaging in peace education at the grassroots level. So the narrative that we only should participate because we constitute a bigger part of the population does injustice to the fact that apart from our constitution's population, our population's constitutions rather, we really, really are affected by conflict and need to have a peaceful and prosperous Africa, as well as a peaceful and prosperous world in which our sustainable development goals are realized. Now, to go back to the expectations that the youth of the African continent have to both the African Union itself and the European Union, and the partnership through which they have and been discussing at the African Union and the European Union summit, what I have seen, especially having participated in the high-level forum on peace building, which was hosted most recently on between the 20th and 21st of January, which was hosted by the states of Qatar and Finland and Colombia. What I realized from participating in that high-level conference in youth-inclusive peace processes was that young people really want a win-win situation. And not just young people, but also even for the African nations themselves. So a relationship through which we can meaningfully participate when it comes to decision-making, when it comes to peace building and conflict resolution. And this is one of the key pillars of the African Union's continental framework on youth, peace and security, which speaks on meaningful participation of young people in peace building. So the framework in terms of the African Union is already there. And what we need is the support and partnership in terms of ensuring that the terms of this framework are actually implemented, and then they result in tangible outputs and result in the reduction of conflict in the African continent.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chegwenya. While we are still waiting for the results, I would like to continue with Mr. Renier. You have heard what the previous speakers have said, so maybe also you could just say shortly if you agree with what has been said so far. But I would also already like to look at one of the major announcements of the summit, and that is the investment package of 150 billion euros within the framework of the Global Gateway Initiative that also Mrs. Bentele mentioned in her introduction. Could you give us some more details about how this money is going to be used? For example, what sectors will benefit from it most, how the funds will be allocated, but also where it's actually coming from. And I would also like to recall, since also Mr. Ambassador talked about that sometimes the implementation has been a problem. I would like to recall the summit of 2017, where the European Fund for Sustainable Development was announced to raise up to 44 billion euros in investments. And maybe just very briefly, was it actually successful, and have there been lessons learned from that?
Thank you very much, Sabine, and good day to everyone. I think I just have 2-3 minutes. Was that the the time set? It's quite a bit to cover, so I'll do my best. Because I really want to also provide some insights and also answers. I think it's very important. And I would like to echo the ambassador on the summit and the outcomes of the summit and the whole atmosphere around the summit, which we have experienced as very positive. And that at different levels. First of all, the presence. There was a very high presence from both sides at the highest level. But also content-wise, and I want to also repeat what the ambassador said. Everything was on the table, and there was a frank discussion. This is my, I think, third summit. I can compare how it was prepared, and I can compare how it was how it took place. And maybe the fact that the format was also different, with roundtables, with limited participation, so that there was a much more dynamic interaction between the heads of state, discussing exactly on difficult issues which were on the table, I think was also beneficial to the outcome. And then the outcome itself, it remained a political and concise joint declaration, which in our point of view brings together all the priorities that we really need to look at together and take forward in the coming years. Now, another novelty was that we have brought together just prior to the summit quite a number of stakeholders in what we have called the Africa-Europe Week, which included a special day for the youth. So there was a youth forum, there was a CSO forum, and there was a big business forum. Just one figure, in total, 28,000 people participated in that setup. And we, of course, like we always do, asked also our delegations, and also in our usual contacts and contacts at the higher level, the reactions from colleagues and from people from Africa. So through the delegations and so on and so on, what the reactions were, and as far what came to us was that it was overall positive. Several African heads of state were positive. We had positive reactions from CSOs and from youth as well. Now, indeed, one of the big key commitments that are mentioned in the declaration is this investment package. That investment package is something that has been in the making for quite some time. And the idea is, and it responds to the big questions and issues that the ambassador raised, is to boost investments, because that is absolutely crucial. We need to boost investments in specific sectors. and by using grants and loans. From our side, we will use grants in order to leverage funds coming from private sector and from our development banks. So the package is a combination of sources of funding from EU institutions, from member states, and leveraged through guarantees and blending via the EIB and European Development Financing institutions in order to attract more private sector funding, because we all know that that is crucial if we really want to make it a difference. Now we have clustered that in 4 clusters. So there is a focus on accelerating the green transition. And there you have different subcomponents. Of course, energy. There is also agri-food. There is climate, the resilience and disaster risk reduction side of it. And there is also in there environment and biodiversity and forestry. There is a second cluster, which is accelerating the digital transition. So that is full focus on digital. A third one is, it's rather a large one, but because it contains quite a number of things, the chapeau needs to be a bit big, and it is accelerating sustainable growth and jobs creations. And in there you have part that is transport coming in support of the PIDA of the African side. It's private sector development with a focus on micro, small and medium enterprises. It is very much economic integration. And there is this fantastic project of the AFCFTA, which we, of course, would like to continue to support. We should not forget science, technology and innovation, which is a bit a cross-cutting issue. And there is the issue of sustainable financing. So all that is in that cluster. And then you have a fourth one, which was also already mentioned, and which is human development. And of course, there we are going to have to focus more on health. On the one hand, vaccine medicine production in Africa, but also in order to be able to roll out these vaccines and the distribution and so on and so on, we need to focus on the more basic health service system. And then there is, of course, education. We just heard on youth. And under education, you also have these 2 levels, where the one is more focusing on vocational and education training in order to prepare students and youth for those areas where there will be a need, and the market will need skilled people. But as we saw through also the effects of the pandemic, there is going to be the need for further support on basic education. Then I think you had another question on how did we move with the European investment plan, which was linked to an initiative by the previous Commission President Juncker, and that was linked to this Alliance for Sustainable Growth and Jobs. Well, indeed, we went from 4.5 billion as grants to 5.4 billion grants. And we did not do the 44 billion in leveraged amounts. We did 54, okay? So we do have experience now in this field. It's a positive one. And because of the fact that it was a positive one, in the new NDICI Global Europe instrument, we have decided to boost that instrument. And so we're talking about here this EFSD plus instrument. And that is why we confidently can say and give the figure of the 150 billion, which includes grants, loans, and guarantees. So I hope I have given you answers to your questions and provided information, and I'm ready to further elaborate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Renier, for all this information, indeed. Mrs. Bentele, I would just like to add on here, because when, as Mr. Renier just explained about the 150 billion euros that were announced, and also looking at the position paper that the EPP published ahead of the summit, do you think that this is enough to build more inclusive and resilient economies, or what else is needed, also with regard to a sustainable European development policy towards Africa? We cannot hear you, Mrs. Bentele.
Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry, I didn't
Yes,
got to
perfect.
unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, the ambassador said we need money. The African economy needs money, so you can never have enough money. So if you talk about these figures, it's I think it's a bit difficult. I think what we need, and this was also made very clear, investments need a certain framework. And if the framework is good, then investments will come in. And this has been shown by many examples. So I think we have to care also about the framework and the investment climate. And here comes also the political dialogue, which needs to hit in. I mean, if we talk about good governance, if you talk about mainly also, and this was also shown in your poll, peace and security. I mean, a country where there is a conflict, a country where there is no respect of property, a country where there is no infrastructure, or it's very difficult for investments to face. So I think we need to have this political dialogue, what we consider as key components of good governance, which means for us also democracy, participation of young people, means perspectives, means a good vocational training, because it's not enough to have some sort of school, but we need vocational training which really fits to the needs of those who want to create jobs. So I think this is much more than just money. So we need to be aware that we need a certain framework, and we can have exchanges about that. I mean, because we also change our frameworks, and we are currently very much changing our frameworks because we see that we are not resilient ourselves, because we are too dependent in terms of energy from imports, and we are too dependent from Asia with regard to semiconductors or chips or raw materials. So we have the same discussion. If you want to have resilient economies, they need to be diversified. And I think we can have a discussion in this regard. This might help both sides to balance this kind of dependencies and to have a more resilient and more diversified economies. I think we can have a political dialogue about that. And it is very important also if you think about sustainable economies, because it's, of course, you can continue to exploit fossil fuels, but we have to be aware where is the future. So, of course, we also will continue to use fossil fuels, but we are being to phase them out. And we try to take the path towards a much stronger promotion of renewable energies, of energy efficiency. And I think these are also issues we have to talk about as partners. So to be really resilient, it's a whole range of issues. And I think it's much more than just providing new money for new projects under the Global Gateway Initiative.
Yeah, thank you very much for elaborating on that. I'm sure maybe some of the panelists will also add more to that as we proceed. Before I would like to turn to you, Dr. Erfurt, I would like to mention that I think, Mr. Renier, it was also very good that you said like how this summit differed from the previous ones, and also told us a little bit of past successes, because our audience is apparently a bit more skeptical about the outcomes of the summit, because we have 70% who say they are not satisfied with the results of the summit, and 62% say that the expectations were not met. As crucial issues, peace and security ranks #1, ahead of climate and environment, democracy and governments, and health and social welfare. Actually, sustainable health is last. And so we are going to tackle some of these issues like peace and security, climate, etc. But now, first of all, Dr. Erfurt, from your perspective as a researcher on AUE relations, what would you say are the most significant omissions of the summit? What are the areas which will urgently need to be addressed in the years ahead? Do you agree with our audience?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for organizing this exchange, which I consider very valuable in bringing us together. It's interesting, the results, and I would be interested in a follow-up survey and to know why, where does this dissatisfaction come from? That would be the follow-up question I would have to the audience, and maybe we can engage in that later on. You asked me for omissions. Rather than omissions, what I see when I look at the summit and the context of the summit, because you cannot just look, and it has already been said, at the summit itself. It is embedded in a broader context. It's embedded in our day-to-day partnership between the two continents. And when you look at the last 2 years only, even go further in the past, but the last 2 years only, what you see rather than omissions is an oversupply of topics and strategies and targets. And we can go back to the March 2020 comprehensive strategy that was announced by the European Commission. Then COVID-19 hit us all, and we engaged in emergency reactions and a very much ad hoc policy that was necessary. At the same time, the budget negotiations for the next 7 years budget were underway, and they brought about this new neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument, again with a strong African focus. And then we had in parallel the development of the Team Europe approach, again, Team Europe emerging from the pandemic, then becoming a tool of foreign policy. To fast forward in 2021, we have the announcement of the Global Gateway. So what I'm trying to do, and I didn't even mention post-Cotonou and parallel agreements, but what I'm trying to show is that there is enough out there. There are not a lot of ideas, good ideas on the table. And the most important thing we need now in the summit, but also beyond at the working level, is more coherence, to streamline those different strategies. And some of these strategies are inherently put in place to improve coherence. I think of NDICI, I think of Team Europe, but this whole approach needs to be more coherent, because the topics are there, but there is a multitude of topics and a multitude of important topics that were all mentioned: the green transition, digital transformation, sustainable growth and jobs, peace and migration and mobility. We added health and so on and so forth. So the topics are there. I think most stakeholders are aware of what are the important topics for the next 10 years, but what is needed is, first of all, a more coherent approach to the relationship. The second point that could fall under omissions, if you want, is the fact that the process with which we approach summits, but also our day-to-day working relationship, needs to be more inclusive, both at the declaratory level, at the summit level, but also at the project level. All stakeholders need to be participating in this partnership, in the decisions, in the strategic decisions of the partnership from early on. And I know there are lots of efforts out there to improve this inclusiveness, and a lot has happened in terms of who participates at what stage in this strategic development. But I think at the practical level, more can be done also in order to differentiate the Europe-Africa partnership from other partnerships, which are more like mere foreign policy relations, where you come with a pre-prepared set of interests, which is very important in some instances, as Ms. Pendler also argued, and then you bring it to the table. But the big distinguishing mark of the Europe-Africa partnership could be the fact that these strategies, the ideas are common goals of both partners or of all partners, because you have different levels in both regions, obviously. And so the second point would be to strengthen the inclusion and the partner buy-in on both sides of the Mediterranean. And the third and last point with regards to emissions or possible improvements, and it was hinted to already, would be the fact that targets, objectives should be credible, tangible, and key figures need to be assessed and monitored in a regular manner. I'm very glad to hear, because I wasn't aware of that the 5.4 billion that were used under EFSD leveraged 55 billion in investments. For a very long time, like academic observers, civil society, and think tanks, they were struggling with the key figures under EFSD and EFSD Plus, and the same is true for Global Gateway, because if you look at these propositions, I mean, the fact is that, the basic assumption is that you take public money, and by using this public money, you mobilize a mixture of public and private investments, which basically is a very good idea on the way towards a partnership that goes beyond 8 dependencies. But the big question here is, you want to achieve credibility. So how much money do you actually leverage? And it's a big unknown. And for a very long time, like if you look at the EFSD, we had very early on commission figures that were assuming a leverage factor of 10. Like when we're starting with these 4.5 billion in public money, they would leverage 10 times the money that was invested. Then there were independent studies that concluded that the leverage ratio is 1. So 1 is not bad. So if you invest €1, you get 1 additional euro. It's not bad, but it's completely different than 10. And for a long time, I would say the monitoring, if it was taking place, it was not transparent enough. And I think part of the success of these very useful instruments is also to have a very transparent and a regular monitoring. And I think we are on the right way here, but then it becomes a credible alternative and a credible promise. And that is very important when you work with unknowns. And I would stop for now here, and then happy for a second round.
Yeah, thank you very much. From now talking about all these more general questions, I would like to come to specific topics now. And Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, I would like to continue with you on the question of COVID-19, because the questions of vaccine distribution and production were of great importance to the African Union. And also, moreover, the hoarding of vaccines, the refusal of patent waivers, as well as Europe's reactions on the discovery of the Omicron variant were major reasons for recently strained relations between African countries and Europe. What kind of progress was made in this area during the summit, and is it enough for the African states?
Merci. Je pense que vous convenez avec moi que la COVID a vraiment montré les limites de nos continents. Ça, c'est de nos capacités, par exemple, sanitaires. Il faut le dire. C'est vrai, l'Europe a un dispositif sanitaire très étoffé, mais en Afrique, nous avons besoin toujours des renforcements de capacités sanitaires. Comme vous le savez, je pense que c'est vrai, si nous sommes dans un monde où les affaires doivent tourner en principe, mais on doit aussi libéraliser les systèmes. C'est très important de production de vaccins. Imaginez-vous avec une population d'1,3 milliard d'habitants et qu'aujourd'hui, vous avez un taux faible, par exemple, très faible de vaccination. Comment peut-être régler ces problèmes? Je pense que ces problèmes ne peuvent peut-être pas être réglés par un problème d'appui. C'est vrai, l'initiative qui a été mise en place, COVAX, a été très salutaire. Mais je pense qu'il faudrait aussi régulariser le système pour permettre la production des vaccins. On a des grandes industries, par exemple, pharmaceutiques en Afrique. Vous avez l'Afrique du Sud, vous avez l'Égypte, vous avez le Sénégal, vous avez et le Cameroun, par exemple, un certain nombre de pays qui peuvent, par exemple, produire des vaccins à leur niveau. Il faudrait peut-être s'en passer tout en vraiment gardant à l'esprit que c'est des santé humaines que nous voulons. Je pense qu'à ce niveau, il faut s'en passer, par exemple, de cet esprit un peu de fermeture et de garder les choses chez soi. Ça, c'est les brevets, je parle de ces brevets. Vous avez tous vu que les discussions ont été vraiment très franches à ces niveaux et que nous avons convenu avec l'Union européenne de se retrouver et avec les autres partenaires pour voir dans quelle mesure nous puissions avoir vraiment une levée, par exemple, de ces mesures. Je pense que nous allons y arriver. Il y a déjà des accords qui ont été signés avec un certain nombre de pays pour la production du vaccin. Je pense qu'il faudrait aller au-delà du vaccin, les systèmes sanitaires en place. Est-ce que, par exemple, en Afrique, on peut, par exemple, trouver des pays qui peuvent s'autosuffire en termes de santé? Je ne pense pas, totalement. Vous allez prendre des territoires qui sont très vastes. Il faut avoir des districts sanitaires, il faut avoir des centres de santé, il faut avoir des centres de santé maternelle, il faut avoir ainsi de suite. Je pense qu'il faudrait, moi, je pense que ce qui est important, et je comprends bien l'interrogation posée par nos spectateurs qui nous suivent. Les gens ont besoin du concret. Laissons nos verbiages, comme on les dit, excusez-moi, politiques et autres. Celui qui a besoin, comme on dit chez nous, ventre affamé n'a point d'oreille. Un jeune qui est là, qui se retrouve en formation, il n'a pas de formation, il n'a pas d'emploi, il cherche du concret. Trouvez-lui la formation qui peut lui permettre, dès qu'il finit, il a quelle capacité de déboucher. Il faudrait que cet entrepreneur aussi puisse faire quelque chose qui lui permette d'être autonome. Cette femme qui, tout au long de la journée, qui est en train de transporter des fagots pour nourrir sa famille, donc il faudrait que tout cela s'arrête. Ça s'arrête par quoi? Par des investissements francs. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous avons dit, voilà une première levée qui va être de 150 milliards. Mais il faudrait redéfinir, par exemple, les projets ensemble. Qu'est-ce que nous voulons mettre sur ces 150 milliards? Vous conviendrez avec moi qu'aujourd'hui, les infrastructures en matière de transport n'existent pas en Afrique. Même si elles existent, l'Afrique n'est pas interconnectée. D'abord, l'interconnexion qui va amener, par exemple, l'intégration. Celui qui va quitter, par exemple, l'Afrique du Sud va se retrouver à Nouakchott. Celui qui va se trouver, par exemple, au Rwanda peut se retrouver en Libye, en Algérie, et exactement. Donc, ça c'est la première chose. Deuxième, les réseaux numériques. Aujourd'hui, la dépendance numérique est devenue une réalité. Comment faut-il faire pour qu'au moins l'Internet soit l'accès le moins cher possible à toutes les populations, que ce soit au village et que ce soit au niveau, par exemple, des capitales? Nous avons un écart de développement, c'est vrai, entre l'Europe et l'Afrique, ce n'est pas la même chose. Je pense qu'on a beaucoup à faire. De l'autre côté, nous avons, par exemple, l'énergie. Aujourd'hui, toutes les populations africaines n'ont pas d'énergie. Et madame, je suis d'accord avec vous, on va aller progressivement vers un désengagement des énergies durables. Mais les Africains n'ont pas d'énergie. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Donc, on ne peut pas non plus s'en passer, par exemple, actuellement, à l'heure où nous sommes, de l'exploitation des énergies fossiles. Soyons réalistes. Parce que les énergies fossiles permettent également de construire des infrastructures. Mais on dit très bien que nous sommes engagés dans le cadre, par exemple, du processus de désengagement. Ça, c'est important. Nous avons également le système d'éducation. Nous avons besoin des écoles des métiers. Si on a besoin d'un plombier, il faut qu'on l'a. Si on a besoin d'un électricien, il faut qu'on l'a. Si on a besoin d'un maçon pour construire quelque chose, il faut qu'on l'a. Donc, il faudrait que l'Europe investisse dans ces centres, par exemple, de formation des métiers. Une fois que les enfants, les jeunes sont formés et que les femmes sont formées, automatiquement, elles peuvent être utiles dans cela. Moi, je pense qu'il faut s'en passer de tout cela, de tout ce que nous sommes en train de dire. On reste sur des procédures longues qui ne permettent pas de mobiliser les ressources. Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec madame par rapport à la transparence. L'amélioration de la gouvernance, c'est important, c'est de l'argent public, c'est de l'argent des privés, c'est de l'argent des citoyens. Donc, il faudrait mettre en place un mécanisme qui peut permettre de voir la traçabilité de ces ressources et répondre de ces actes en termes de redevabilité. Je pense qu'on a changé de paradigme. Nous nous sommes engagés vers une franchise. Donc, tout le long du sommet, nous avons vraiment parlé franchement. Donc, prochainement, il faudrait qu'on se retrouve. On va dire 1, 2, 3 et 4. Voilà, 5 ou 6. Ce sont les projets numérativement qui doivent être financés ensemble et par quelle procédure nous allons mettre en place ces projets dans les 5 ans à venir et que nous puissions voir dans les 7 ans à venir qu'est-ce que nous avons fait en termes concrets par rapport à ces mécanismes de suivi qui est très important. Il faut que ce soit un mécanisme très efficace, un mécanisme pas très lourd, avec vraiment des instruments aussi qui vont permettre de surveiller, que ce soit au niveau du Parlement, de nos parlements respectifs, que ce soit au niveau de nos locaux. On ne peut pas faire d'un partenariat si on n'a pas toutes les couches sociales avec nous. Ce n'est pas fait seulement pour les décideurs politiques. Donc, il faudrait que la jeunesse, les femmes soient vraiment en œuvre pour qu'au moins ces projets puissent se mettre en exécution. Voilà ce que je voulais vraiment amener comme élément de réponse. Je pense que nous allons aussi suivre ce que nos amis qui nous écoutent veulent ce qu'on le fasse. Et nous sommes prêts à le faire.
Thank you very much. I will immediately, because of time, also move on to the next topic, and would also ask that with view to that many questions are now coming in from the audience, that we try to shorten our answers for the coming questions. I would like to continue with Mr. Renier, as another bone of contention in EU relations is the question of climate justice and possible repercussions of the European Green Deal for African countries. The commitments in the final declaration of the summit regarding climate change and policy are rather vague. Could you elaborate a bit on what has been discussed and maybe agreed upon during the summit, and have the concerns of the African side been taken into account?
Thank you, Sabine. Whatever is vague means it's the outcome, the result of a compromise. So this is a difficult one, but we discussed it and we will continue discussing it. I mean, there were at the highest level discussions with President Macky Sall, who made the point on energy transition very clear. And there is an openness on the EU side, but it's a difficult one. How to square the circle is not easy for all of us, because on the one hand, we have the Paris Agreement, which we all signed. You most probably have read the latest IPCC report that came out, very alarmist. We know where we're going if we don't do anything, or if we continue on the same pace. So that is also not the way to go. On the other hand, you have people that need access to energy, and it should be affordable on top of it. On the EU side, in view of this, the COPs and the results and the outcomes of the COPs, there is the Green Deal. And below it, we have financing instruments that were approved by everyone in the institutions and the parliament, including, of course. And those set limitations on what you can finance and what you cannot finance. So we have to deal with that. Then there are, as far as I know, banks that also have difficulties in financing a number of things that go the wrong way. EIB, AFD, KfW. So there are limitations. But where there are no limitations is for us to help change the energy mix of the countries. Okay, and that is where we have to go and look at. Of course, a country decides itself on which resources it wants to further exploit or not. That is obvious. But where we can assist, there are limitations. So this is a reality, and that is why we need to further continue these discussions, and we are doing them. But yeah, these are the realities, and I think that there are certainly ways to look at things, but that's also a mistake that is made very often. And the ambassador knows that very well. When we talk about Africa, is like is all the same. I mean, it's that you have so many different countries at different levels that you really have to look. You can't. It's not a blanket approach. You really have to look at each situation. And if in a country, by moving away from coal, they have to use gas for a certain point of time, it means they go in the right trajectory of reducing CO2. We can discuss, but it depends so much on that. These discussions need to be taken then with the country, at the country level. So that's another thing I would like to underline. It's very complex. The relationship, not the relationship is complex. the coming together of two continents and discussing such a wide panoply of issues is not easy. Therefore, I repeat, the outcome, if you take a grille de lecture of the declaration, there are really a lot of commitments on a lot of priorities in there. And we have started our work internally by listing them and by seeing in this investment package which are the flagships that are needed in order to translate these commitments into reality. We are already internally, and we will, of course, come to member states, stakeholders, and our African friends to discuss all this. But we are setting up kind of roadmaps to make sure that we know which are the key steps we need to take when, in order to make sure that we deliver. And so that is for us the first step. Monitoring, you do at the point in time when there is something to monitor, when you have results. Now, we had the summit. We agreed on the priorities. We have commitments. We have to follow on, and we have to make sure that we deliver. And now it's the time to see how in detail we need to do that. For example, you take a corridor where we need transport to be developed. When are we going to? Is there a feasibility study? Was there already something that we can build on from the EDF, the 11th EDF? If so, what exactly? If a feasibility study is needed, okay, when are we going to launch it? Who is going to launch it? Who do we need to bring around the table? Which private sector do we need to talk to? Which are the banks we need to talk to? Which are the African partners we need to have around the table? That whole roadmap is what is needed in order to come to a deliverable. And we think that is the focus of the next months. And we will further discuss with our African colleagues in Addis. No, it's going to be in Brussels, sorry, at the C2C. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much also for this very realistic assessment of the topic of climate policy. The audience actually say that peace and security is one of the core challenges. So Ms. Chigwenya, this is the topic I would like to talk with you about as the Youth Ambassador for Peace, whose term has just started. Peace and security has certainly been a color of the AU-EU partnership. The AU security structure has recently faced several challenges, like increasing political crisis and conflict in member states, including a series of coup d'etat and rising tensions between Mali and France, to name just a few. How do these challenges affect the EU-EU's partnership in the field of peace and security? And what role does the engagement of other global players play here?
Thank you very much for those questions. And before I get into them, perhaps it will be decent to refer to the contributions that were made by Ambassador Ahmad on the impact on livelihoods, and that brings the context in which some of the contexts in the African continent occur. So issues that you mentioned in the question, such as increasing political crisis, conflict in member states, as well as other conflicts that we see, such as violence, insurgencies, really do not occur in a vacuum. They occur in a space where livelihood is threatened. They occur in an environment where there is unemployment, and participation in conflict is then incentivized. So people are actually offered some sort of incentive to participate in politics. So this is the context in which some of the challenges that you mentioned occur. And what they present, instead of a challenge to the AU and the EU partnership, they actually present an opportunity for the African Union and the European Union to find innovative ways to respond to conflict. So in as much as that might be interpreted as a challenge, what it is an opportunity to look into how best can the two organizations cooperate so that they address the context in which these conflicts occur. And I'm also happy that Ms. Bentley referred to the issue that funding alone is not enough. The partnership between the European Union and the African Union needs to go beyond funding. And this is one of the innovative ways we're mentioning about. And in the context of the Europe investment package of around 150 billion euro, we really support the contribution by Ambassador Ahmad on how that contribution alone has to be suckered by accountability mechanisms to monitor how those funds are used so that they do reach they give the output that they want. And apart from just being apart from accountability, there's also need for inclusion. This is the inclusion of women and youth in these various processes. So one of the innovative ways through which the African Union and the European Union can ensure that they respond to conflicts that are emerging, not just in the African context, but that we see occurring in other parts of the world, is also through the investment in youth and young peace builders. And an example I will give is a preventive pillar, which is one of the pillars of the Continental Framework on Youth, Peace and Security. What this does is that it allows young people and various stakeholders to participate in conflict prevention before it even occurs. So investment in peace funds, in peace education, and investment in peace initiatives that really create awareness of the impact of conflict and how destructive they could be to development. And if I may, I'll refer to the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, who said the objectives of development, peace, and human rights should be pursued together, otherwise none will succeed. And I've been very fortunate to work in contexts such as Rwanda, where you see the impact of conflict on the various societies. So really, if nation states and its key stakeholders prioritize the prevention of conflict, then this will be a key method through which conflicts are minimized and resolved before they even cost more and more money. The other part of the question that I was given refers to the conflict that's becoming multifaceted, and we see other global players such as China, such as Russia, coming into the play and to add to the multi-dimensions of the conflicts that we see around the globe. And I think in as much as we are seeing these conflicts as a threat, they also show the extent to which peace and security is a global challenge. And not just a challenge we see on the African continent, but a challenge we're increasingly seeing anywhere else. And that presents both the African Union and the European Union an opportunity to coordinate our efforts, an opportunity to work together and ensure that our efforts really bring about a peaceful world through which we can then speak of the advancement of Agenda 2060 of the African Union, and we can also speak about the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in a nutshell, the political crisis as well as conflict in member states are really reflective of the situations, the context where we have poverty, where we have unemployment, and incentives being used for young people to participate. And while other global players being involved in these conflicts, we also see it as an opportunity for both the African Union and the EU to be innovative and to look at other methods that could be used, such as engaging young people and realizing the role that they could play in increasing awareness and preventing conflicts that we see across the world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, I would like to tell the audience you can continue to pose questions in the Q&A and the chat. We will get back to them very soon. But first of all, Mrs. Bentele, Ms. Chigoniya has hinted at it. We have now a major peace and security challenge in Europe itself with the Ukraine war. And observers say that against this backdrop, the EU has to reinvent itself as a global player. What strategic partnership with Africa do you envisage in the light of such demands? And is there a danger that Europe might lose sight of this partnership and have a more inward-bound focus, maybe even endangering any progress made during the summit?
Well, I think, of course, we are now very much occupied with security in Europe, very much. So I don't see, I mean, to be very honest, I don't see a lot of appetite to look for security on other continents. So, I mean, to be very real and honest, I think this will occupy us for a long time. And I mean, it was said that NATO has been, how it was called, brain dead. No, NATO has been revived. And what you see that, military expenses go up. So, but this is all destined to make Europe more safe and to defend ourselves, our territory, and against the Russian aggression, and also to help Ukraine. And if you look at the destruction, this will be a long-term task. So, and I also think there is a moment of geopolitical clarity, I think if you look to the African continent and if we see involvement of Russian actors, military actors there, I don't see that we will have at the same moment European involvement at the same moment. So there will be much less appetite to continue this kind of partnerships. I think one of the key questions is that Africa provides for its own security, because there are instruments at place also under United Nations umbrella. So I think in this regard, I'm not very optimistic that the EU will continue its engagement on the African continent. But on the other hand, we lost a partner in Europe. We lost Russia as a partner in terms of energy, also as an economic partner. So we are looking for a new partner. And we are looking for new partners in Africa, that's for sure. And so I don't think that Africa will be not in sight. I think Africa comes into sight. And the potential which is there and the opportunities which are there need to be exploited. So in this regard, I see more future. But in terms of security, I'm more pessimistic that this will lead to a withdrawal of European engagement in Africa, because we are very much occupied at the moment and will be occupied for quite a while with European security.
Yeah, thank you very much for your honest words. Before I bring in some of the questions from the audience, Dr. Erfurt, I would like to ask you, since we also have some German members of parliament here and German political decision makers, let's have a look at the role also of EU institutions vis-a-vis Africa as opposed to bilateral relations. Is the bloc's Africa policy significantly more than the lowest common denominator of its member states' policies towards Africa? And how is Germany's Africa policy aligned with Europe's? Are there any particular differences you would like to highlight? And how should it be aligned with the new government that is now in place?
Thank you. So my short answer would be a qualified yes. So there is more to it than just the addition of individual national policies. The first point would be simply a matter of scale and size, and the changing geopolitical environment was already mentioned, like by Ms. Bentley just right now. If you compare individual European member states with the economic, the political, and the military might of countries such as China, Russia, and the United States, it makes sense to have a common and joint approach. And the European Union and its 27 member states, they have a complete different weight, obviously, than individual member states. So that would be the first point. The second point here is it depends very much on the sector you're looking at, how well coordination between European member states functions and how much they can be aligned and policies can be aligned. It differs tremendously between security policy, migration, or investment partnerships, for instance. But this said, a third point would be to say an added value or an added value of a common European approach does not necessarily lie in the full alignment of all 27 member states and the EU institutions, which is overall a very complex process, as Mr. Renier already outlined, but also in the fact that the European Union can engage in some sort of division of labor, so an externalization of the principle of subsidiarity. And this already happens in practice. If you look, for instance, in one example would be development finance, where you have the European Union setting up an open architecture where different member states and financing institutions of individual member states can join in with their respective expertise. And under this umbrella, then an initiative such as the Mutual Reliance Initiative, which came into life between the European Investment Bank, the French Agence Française de Développement, and the German Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, so two national states and one EU institutions that basically implement within this smaller framework a European idea. This would be one example of division of labor and added value of a common approach without having to align within one project all 27 member states, as long as this European spirit is present. Another more timely example was also the format of the summit itself, the 7 round tables. When you look at how European member states were, or which European member states were chairing respectively these round tables, there is obviously a division in terms of expertise. Estonia was, if I'm not mistaken, responsible for digitalization, France for sustainable finance. You had Germany on the health roundtable for obvious reasons. So I think one of the key added values of the bloc lies also in its ability to bring in different expertise and different interests and assure a certain division of labor. And very quickly on the second question of are there stark difference between the potential national Africa strategy on the part of Germany and the European Africa policy or the Europe-Africa partnership? Overall, they are very much aligned with each other because there is obviously the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals that work as a framework. More recently, the EU Agenda 2063 serves as a framework. So the overall alignment is there, and then differences emerge, as I said earlier, with regards to specific sectors. What is important for the new Africa strategy of the new government in Germany is that Germany, as the #1 economy and the second largest in the European Union and the world's second largest donor, needs to be aware of its role within the European Union and set certain incentives and accents, and also in the realm of peace and security, where the governments used to be, or like Germany as a nation state used to be rather reluctant for many historical and political reasons. And we observed a change with regards to Ukraine, a rather dramatic change. And we also observed this with regards to Germany's overall presence in the international system. Even so, short term, the consequences, I would also agree with Ms. Bendler, will be that there will be a stronger focus on the East and NATO commitments, but in the long term, it could also lead to a reawakening and a reconfiguration of German foreign policy in that regard.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, we are already a little bit late, but nevertheless, I would still like to get in some of the questions that the audience asked. I already apologize that we will not be able to answer all the questions that are still in the audience. The major questions that I can see here actually do address mainly I believe, Mr. Renier, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, and Hildegard Bentele. So I would like you to take notes first, because I'm going to read them all, and then you can answer them together. So we have Jan Hölting from the MP Jamila Schäfer's office, who's asking if the EU-AU summit, in your opinion, has addressed trade barriers between the two continents appropriately. That is one question. Also, Marvin Platt is asking in how far was the issue of migration addressed at the EU-AU summit, and in which respect do African and European views on it differ or cohere nowadays? We have the embassy of the Democratic Republic of Congo that is asking which concrete mechanism has been put in place to make sure the effective implementation of the raised options for the two sides, the AU and the EU. And we have the ambassador of Senegal here in Germany also asking in that direction about how this summit differs from others. How are you assured that the funds that are promised are going to be mobilized and also used in respect to the priorities that the African countries are setting? So yeah, also with due to time, I would like to maybe ask Mr. Renier to reply first.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll try. The trade barriers. There was, of course, a discussion about trade, but more focused on the AFCFTA. That is my reading. There are certainly in that context also discussions on trade barriers. Well, I need to have a word with with our specialists, but in our support to the AFCFTA, there are a number of work streams that deal with several subcomponents of the AFCFTA, and maybe the ambassador knows them better. And trade barriers is one of them. Whether it went into that detail at the summit, I doubt. But that is a subject that is also going to be taken up in the follow-up in this investment package, because one thing that I wanted to say, but I wanted to keep it short, is of course the need for a proper business environment or investment climate. Because you can wish for a lot of investments from private sector, but then you need to give them some kind of security. And of course, there we expect also a lot from our African colleagues, because this is in the hands of the different governments on how to improve that business climate, and there we go into governance and good governance and justice and the setting up of a working justice system and so on and so on. So that there is a lot behind that. On migration, there were of course discussions. And we all know the discussions, we all know the difficult parts of that discussion. Our reading is that we had, again, a quite frank discussion on that. And there are, yeah, indeed, differences. But sometimes while you agree to differ on a number of things, but we were still able to include conclusions and commitments to work further on these issues. On this, the concrete mechanisms for implementation. and that has been, I think, coming back several times. I sometimes get the impression as if there was not a kind of mechanism that was in place before. Of course, we have followed up on Abidjan. And of course, we have the necessary tables that show what has been done and what has been achieved. So there are existing structures, but maybe they have to be reinforced. And that is that is for a possibility that we or have to communicate better on them. But for sure, I mean, you can make many promises, but if you do not show how you follow up on them, then that is to your to our disadvantage. So from our side, we are reflecting further on how to do this. But again, and it was said by the ambassador, let's not start creating a heavy machinery again, which will need and absorb a lot of energy and a lot of work. Let's see what exists, what can be improved, as long as we can show better what the how we are following up. So that is certainly a priority that is also going to be on the table on the commission to commission meeting. Then there is the same, I think is the same question or answer as the last question on funds mobilized and used, how we will report on them and so on and so on. So the ideas are, we have annual ministerial meetings for ministers of foreign affairs. And there is the idea to have some kind of committee that prepares the kind of reporting on where we are in the follow-up of the commitments of the summit. The details need to be further discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that the audience is also or feels like me that there's a lot to be discussed here, and that's why we are extending the time a little bit. I hope that is okay. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, I would like you to also answer the questions that were posed, and maybe since we have now talked about the like indicators and what actually shows the success, maybe you could also voice your opinion on what actions maybe we would need within the next 1 year that would indicate the success of the new African-European partnership, in addition to the questions that were asked from the audience.
Merci, madame. Moi, je pense que, comme on l'a dit tout à l'heure, comme nous avons changé de paradigme par rapport à l'efficacité, c'est-à-dire nous allons chercher comment ces mécanismes de suivi doivent être flexibles, communicants et agissants. Flexibles, c'est-à-dire tout en se rappelant, je pense qu'on n'a pas besoin de les cacher. Après les sommets de 2017 d'Abidjan, il a fallu attendre plus de, je pense, 2 ou 3 ans peut-être, avant qu'un plan d'action puisse être élaboré. Ce n'est pas normal. Donc, je pense qu'à ce niveau, nous tous, on convient avec nos amis européens de la Commission, on travaille ensemble pour rendre ceci efficace. Je pense que, comme au niveau du continent, nous avons l'agence NEPAD, qui est une agence d'exécution des grands projets intégrateurs. Donc, il faudrait que nous, maintenant, avec la Commission de l'Union européenne, la Commission européenne, nous travaillons ensemble pour identifier, par exemple, tout ce qui est projet, comme l'a dit mon collègue. Voir quels sont ces projets qui sont déjà identifiés, est-ce que l'étude de faisabilité a été faite, tout ceci, ça concerne quelle nature de projet, effectivement. Donc, Ça permettra également de faire un certain nombre de points, je pense, avant que même nous n'arrivions à la réunion politique des commissions à commission. Donc, je pense qu'à ce niveau, nous sommes tous d'accord. L'efficacité des mécanismes dépendra de notre efficacité et de notre disponibilité surtout. Je pense qu'il faut qu'on s'en passe de tout ce qui est lourdeur administrative et autres cela. Mais ce qui dit flexibilité ne dit pas aussi qu'il faut donner des chèques en blanc. Non, il faut mettre un système de redevabilité où tous les acteurs doivent répondre en cas de besoin. La zone de libre-échange continentale, 1,2 milliard d'habitants, 1,2 milliard de consommateurs. Nous avons 55 pays qui doivent être connectés à la libre circulation des biens et des personnes. Nous avons bien sûr besoin d'un tissu industriel renforcé, la transformation industrielle de l'Afrique pour que l'Afrique devienne un grand partenaire pour l'Europe et les autres. C'est important. Si demain l'Europe s'organise et que nous, au niveau de l'Union africaine ou de l'Afrique, nous nous organisons à vouloir créer un accord de libre-échange entre nous et l'Europe, je pense qu'il y a quand même des préalables qu'il faut d'abord récompenser. Le tissu industriel doit être mis à la pointe, c'est normal. Et nous allons travailler ensemble parce que nos destins sont croisés. Donc nous devrons travailler pour qu'au moins la mise en place de la zone de libre-échange soit d'abord une réalité au niveau continental entre les communautés économiques régionales qui sont 8, pour dire que la CEDEAO doit commercer avec la CAC avec la SADC, l'IGAD, ainsi de suite. Et après, maintenant, voir dans quelle réflexion nous allons nous mettre ensemble pour comment ces marchés puissent être ouverts. Migration. Je pense qu'il faut se dire les choses en face. Nous sommes en face d'une situation un peu particulière à l'heure où nous parlons, avec tout ce que vous avez vu comme la crise suite à la crise à l'Ukraine et qui a permis de drainer un certain nombre de migrants, que ce soit européens, que ce soit aussi africains. Je pense qu'il faut s'en passer et ouvrir quand même les barrières pour qu'au moins des Africains puissent être. Nous sommes dans un partenariat qui est normal, je pense. Et on ne doit pas faire la distinction, par exemple, des traitements entre les êtres humains. C'est une situation conflictuelle. Ce qui est arrivé, je pense, à ceux-là n'est pas de gaieté de cœur. Donc, les gens se sont retrouvés. Donc, il faudrait les accueillir. La grande partie, ce ne sont pas des immigrés irréguliers. Ce sont des étudiants. Je pense qu'il faudrait vraiment les faire pour qu'au moins cette coopération puisse donner des fruits et qu'on puisse dire aux gens que voilà, nous avons vraiment quelque chose qui est palpable. Au niveau politique, l'engagement a été pris. Le président Charles Michel a parlé, le président de la Commission a parlé, le président Macky Sall a parlé. Nous avons pris d'engagement vraiment et tous, unanimement, nous avons pris des dispositions pour qu'on puisse faire accéder, c'est-à-dire dans les territoires européens, tous ceux qui sont là, qui ont quitté vraiment cette crise. Mais en pratique, je pense qu'il y a une réalité qui ne dit pas son nom. Donc, il faudrait vraiment à ce niveau parler. Il ne faudrait pas voir seulement l'aspect migration parce que ceux-là se mouvent. Pourquoi ceux-là viennent en Europe? Je pense que c'est important de régler les problèmes à la base. C'est ce qui sous-entend les problèmes de développement. Je voudrais aussi, par rapport à, si vous permettez, par rapport aux questions de paix et sécurité. Vous savez qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons un problème réel de paix et sécurité. Et que nous avons, l'Afrique a une architecture de paix et sécurité et dont l'Union européenne est un partenaire important dans le cadre des fonds pour la facilité de paix et sécurité, sans oublier aussi l'Allemagne qui est un grand partenaire. C'est important de le dire. Parce que quand on voit aujourd'hui l'Allemagne construire un immeuble de Conseil de paix et sécurité de l'Union africaine, je pense que c'est une initiative qui est importante qu'il faudrait saluer. Nous voulons maintenant, pour qu'au moins dans le cadre un peu tactique, il faudrait renforcer les capacités des forces militaires. Les forces militaires partout, c'est le G5 Sahel, des pays qui composent le G5 Sahel, avoir des matériels, avoir aussi des équipements, par exemple, en matière d'armement. Il faut avoir aussi la logistique, en matière c'est-à-dire l'alimentation. Il faut avoir des dispositifs sanitaires. Tout ceci, si nous nous mettons ensemble avec les mécanismes que nous allons mettre ensemble, nous allons trouver des forces africaines qui peuvent se défendre. Et bien sûr, les Nations Unies aussi doivent être flexibles pour financer un certain nombre d'opérations de maintien de la paix. Donc, avec des opérations de maintien de la paix classiques, je pense qu'on n'arrivera jamais à régler cette question du terrorisme. Je pense qu'à ce niveau, on a intérêt ensemble, Union européenne, Union africaine, de travailler pour renforcer tous les pays qui sont en difficulté. Les pays du G5 Sahel, les pays du bassin du lac Tchad qui doivent aussi lutter contre Boko Haram. Nous avons la Corne de l'Afrique, donc et effectivement aussi renforcer tout cela avec la médiation également aussi et la prévention en termes de conflits. Moi, je pense que dans les jours à venir, nous allons peut-être avoir des contacts entre nous, entre les Européens et nous-mêmes au niveau du comité de pilotage. Et ensemble, nous allons nous pencher pour qu'au moins tous ces engagements qui ont été pris au nom des deux continents puissent être une réalité. Merci de m'avoir donné la parole.
Merci beaucoup. And Mrs. Benteler, you have the last word of the panel before Dr. Friedrich will have the task to summarize what we have been talked about in this very contentful discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, we have had a lot of input, and I think it was very valuable to have this discussion. If we look how we go forward, and I think there were very good points made by Mr. Erfurt, and I shared them fully. We need to have targets. We really should assess where we stand, and I would wish to have a summit which first does a stock taking what was done the last 5 years, and then formulate new projects. And also have projects and then talk about the money. So this would be the good. This would be a good approach, because I share, like Mr. Erfurt, also the impression that we need better communication. I think on our Africa policy, we need better and clearer communication. What is the progress we have made? What are the problems we have made? Because our competitors are very good into this. If you look at the Chinese approach in public diplomacy on the African continent, they're pretty vocal. And I think we are not vocal enough. We are not clear enough in our objectives. And I think we should work on that. I think we are fully supportive in the parliament. And I suppose also science and civil society would be supportive, but we need a more clear direction where we go, and we need better targets, how to assess our progress.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank all the panelists for your various contributions. I would also like to thank the audience for staying with us for this long. And of course, I would like to thank our partners in this webinar, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, for the very good cooperation. And I would like to hand over to Dr. Friedrich, who will now conclude this webinar.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking at the end of a fascinating debate, it's always very difficult to sum up or to add something that has not yet been said, particularly in a hybrid setting, and mostly a digital setting that we have now. In a room, you are less likely to run away and then end the discussion, but with the possibility to just switch off, it's much easier. So therefore, I really want to limit my closing remarks to two very brief elements. The first element, it is important that we continue this discussion about the EU-AU relationship. I recently was in another meeting, and there was a discussion, or there was the suggestion that European-African relationship, you have always a very hectic activity around the summit, and then 3 years of silence and sleeping away, and that should definitely not be the case. And I'm not sure whether this is true, and I'm actually, I doubt it. And also listening to our today's event, I think that's definitely not the case. And Hildegard Benteler put it very nicely in her introductory remarks when she said, we need to get to work. And that's actually really what we need. And having these kind of discussions, I think that is the direction we have to go. And as Mr. Renier put it, sometimes it is also necessary to start by settling on we agree to disagree. And particularly in the framework of working together, two continents which are not alike. I mean, there are lots of differences, and to bring them together, I think we have to start by sometimes agreeing to not to disagree, and then continue to find compromises. And now to my second element of my closing remarks. Of course, words of thanks are in order, primarily to our wonderful panelists, Hildegard Benteler, Your Excellency Ambassador Sakina, Mr. Renier, Mr. Erford, and Cynthia. Thank you very much for contributing to this discussion. And many thanks should also go to our moderator, Sabine. Thank you very, very much for this. But we should not stop at the top level, the Secretary General of the German Africa Foundation. I would also like to thank her colleagues for preparing this program. And I also want to thank my colleagues at the Department of the Sub-Saharan Africa at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Here, particularly thanks go to Matthias Kamp and Katrin Schulzki, but also others. I'm very much looking forward to further cooperation between CAS and the German Africa Foundation, but also with all the institutions that have been gathered around this screen. Thanks for your contributions and have a nice evening. Goodbye, and thanks for enduring with us a little bit longer than projected, but I think the discussion was really worth it. Thank you very much.